The Waiting Hours. Written by Ellie Dean. Read by Julie Maisey. When the great red dawn is shining, when the waiting hours are past, when the tears of night are ended, and I see the day at last, I shall come, down the road of sunshine, to a heart that is fond and true. When the great red dawn is shining, back to home, back to love, and you. When the Great Red Dawn is Shining, an American song from 1917. Part 1. November 1943. Chapter 1. Devon. The sun had barely risen over the eastern hills when Carol set out from Coombe Farm with the horse and cart. Dressed in the Land Army uniform of beige sweater, shirt and khaki dungarees, beneath the standard-issue gabardine mac and thick scarf, she was insulated against the cold, though she knew she must look rather ridiculous, with her fair curls tucked beneath the hand-knitted tea-cosy-style hat. Carol had always liked these early hours when she made the milk delivery, especially at this time of year, when the steep-sided coombes were shrouded in mist. The dew glittered on the freshly ploughed earth, and a hush lay over the scattered huddles of villages and the patchwork quilt of fields and grazing pastures. Her work as a land girl suited her perfectly, and the fact that she could go home to her cottage every night was an added bonus, for she guarded her privacy and independence fiercely. Hector, the Shire, had plodded patiently along the winding cobbled streets, where thick-walled, thatched cottages nestled against one another like loaves on a baker's tray, and the housewives came out with their billy cans to collect their milk ration and make a fuss of him. He'd negotiated the narrow lanes winding between the high banks to stop by farm gates atop lonely hills, and waited stoically as she'd exchanged empty churns for the heavy full ones, and then carried on with a whicker of pleasure as they'd approached Slapton village, for this was where he would head for home and a well-deserved breakfast. Carol held the reins loosely in her gloved hands and let her thoughts wander. There was no need to guide Hector, as he'd been doing this round for years, and she enjoyed these quiet moments after the earlier hectic activity in the milking shed, the silence broken only by the sound of the heavy clomp of his hooves on the stony tracks, the jingle of harness, and the occasional cry of a seabird. Carol's dreamy mood was broken by familiar sound, and she looked out towards the distant seashore and the freshwater lake that glittered in the early sunlight behind its shingle bar. With a smile of pleasure, she watched the flock of geese rising from Slapton Lee, their honking conversation echoing in the stillness as they formed a chevron and flew towards Kingsbridge estuary. It was a sight she'd seen many times before, but still it entranced her, confirming once again how very lucky she was to live in this special part of England. With the lighter load, Hector had picked up the pace as they climbed the hill towards Slapton, the empty churns rattling against one another, the harness jangling with every thud of his hooves. Now Carol could see the ruin of the 14th-century tower looming over the thatched roofs of the village. The imposing remains had once been part of an ecclesiastic college and chantry, before the dissolution. The cottages for the men who'd built it long since converted into the quaint and popular Tower Inn, the chantry now a rather grand private home. As they crested the hill, Carol could see that the village was coming to life. They approached the village school, and she caught sight of her best friend Betty Wellings, who was busy shepherding her small charges through the door into the single classroom. Betty was small and fair, and had just celebrated her 25th birthday. Had fate been kinder, she would have liked to have joined the WAFs, but she'd been struck down by polio as a child, and now walked with a caliper and cane. Yet that couldn't overshadow her enthusiasm for life, or her pleasure in teaching the children. Betty must have heard Hector's approach, for she looked up and waved, her beaming smile lighting up her
Sample complete. Ready to continue?